Special thanks to Barrow Motors of Burnham-on-Sea in Somerset for providing the car in this review, of course, and if you are in the southwest of the UK, or maybe even a little bit further afield and would like to check out this vehicle or their other current stock, or even commission them to find you a car across the UK, then of course you can find all of those details by clicking through to their website via the link right below this video in the description. I'm going to begin this particular review by going ahead and spoiling the entire thing by saying that I loved driving this car. I really enjoyed my time in the Peugeot RCZ, and even though it's not the most exciting prospect of a vehicle to review, in this form in particular being essentially a base model, the 1.6 litre GT with that petrol engine and the 6-speed manual, I wanted to review it because it's always been a car that I was interested in. To have this ballsy attitude from Peugeot of taking on Audi at their own game directly against the TT Quattro, a car that's established, it's respected, it's very good consistently, to then come out of nowhere with a car like this. From Peugeot, a brand who have done good performance cars here and there and have had success in motorsport, but they're not really known for this kind of thing. You don't think Peugeot when you think of a 2+2 sports car, or at least most of us don't. With that in mind though, that is why I wanted to see what it was actually bringing to the table, and that's where it works both for and against it. See, being a Peugeot means that you have the good sides of having lower initial expectations, so you could easily be pleasantly surprised if it is good, and it also means they don't keep their value. And even though as a seller that's unfortunate, for us buyers that's great, because it means you could potentially get a fantastic car for a low price, because most people would choose the Audi. That is true, because here in the UK on the used market, these are dirt cheap. 2.5 grand is the entry point for a Peugeot RCZ, and that's just on Auto Trader, for example, which isn't necessarily the cheapest place to buy one. Now for that kind of price, of course you're looking for a lower model like the one I'm driving, definitely higher mileage like 120, 130,000 miles, up around 170,000 kilometers in other words. So of course a car like that is more of a risk, but the fact remains that is your entry point. And where things really get crazy to me is the fact that you can pay only £19,000 for the most expensive examples on the market. Still less than 20 grand, and that's for like a 2014, 2015 shaped model, so in other words near the end of its run with only 30-40,000 miles, and at that level we're literally talking about the top of the line R model with 270 horsepower that does 0 to 60 in 5.9 seconds, literally as quick as a Ford Focus RS, and you could say more stylish than one as well, and only 300 of those were ever sent to the UK, so it's also a unicorn. I mean, the value for money, at least on paper, is astronomical on these cars. But where the Peugeot badging and the name and the infrastructure of the brand works against you is that because they don't do this as much, because they use infrastructure from other models which might not be as pure in their performance orientation, you could end up with a car that has some faults. That is where these do struggle. They do have issues. And I'm not going to go into an exhaustive list because, of course, a quick Google search through owners' forums will come up with a number of the most common ones, but they do tend to suffer from a mix of both mechanical, or in other words, more serious issues here and there, to more cosmetic-based stuff. Some people will praise them all day long. I'm one of those, but again, I haven't owned the car, so I can't speak to it from a long-term perspective. Other people have said that they've owned it and didn't like it. At the same time, you could pretty much say that about every car on the market. There's always somebody who doesn't like it, so always take those with a grain of salt. In terms of what this exact car offers, well, it comes in a variety of specs, but kind of a baseline of two engines overall. And those two major choices are a 1.6 petrol or a 2-litre diesel. Those are pretty much the two that you're working with. Now, the power ranges from a baseline of about 160 horsepower, which is incidentally the one that I'm driving here. So in other words, I'm driving the bottom of the barrel, and I even like this one, so it shows the potential of those higher up models, and incidentally the next model up, the 200 horsepower, tends to get the most praise. But then, of course, you've got the R model, which I talked about before. Still a 1.6 litre, interestingly, but putting out a huge amount of power at 270 with a lot of torque as well. The torque, incidentally, is of course the best on the diesel at 340 Newton meters in that case, about 250 pound-feet, and the lowest is still 180 pound-feet, and that's this car. That's 240 Newton meters. So even in this form, it still has more torque than power. In fact, initially, it very much to me felt like I was driving a diesel, even though it wasn't. And one of the great things about that is you actually do get the same kind of advantages of a diesel. The fuel economy, for example, is fantastic on these cars. Now, the official numbers put it at 30 to the gallon in a city, 54 miles per gallon on the motorway, and an average of 42. Now, according to Honest John, which of course is a user and owner aggregated site for the kind of economy that people actually get, these tend to average about 38 to 40 in practice. That's pretty damn good for a 2+2 GT, especially again one that isn't a diesel. The crazy thing is though, the R model can also match that. The 270 horsepower top of the range is still a 40 mile per gallon vehicle. We're establishing that this car is already fantastically cheap, has great economy, and of course, depending on personal preference, a hell of a lot of style. What about the actual driving feel though? Well, in terms of performance, the 0 to 60 on this one is only around the 8-second region, top end speed is just over 130 miles an hour, so it's kind of like a lower tier hot hatch in terms of performance. Where it really comes into its own though, is through corners. This car has been consistently praised by everyone from Top Gear down for having great cornering, great handling, and great driving manners. Of course, it is a front-wheel drive chassis. I do really wish that they'd had a rear-wheel drive or especially four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive model. Audi really would be concerned if they'd have done that, because based on how good this front-wheel drive version is, it would have been pretty amazing, and I wish they had. And it also comes with either a 6-speed manual or a 6-speed auto, although the higher model, such as the R, only has the manual. Now, the one that I'm driving, of course, is the manual. You could see that from the video. I'm not a huge manual fan, so of course it's always a true test of if a manual is nice to work with if I like it, rather than somebody who just likes manuals anyway. I will say, not my favourite manual I've ever used, but certainly not bad. It was kind of middle of the road for me, nothing too special, it just did its job, which I guess is what you can mostly ask for at the end of the day. What really impressed me though is the chassis, the suspension setup, the way the car feels, its rigidity, and actually, especially for a base model, one of the most impressive things was the lack of body roll. It really does hold its own through corners, even in this lower tier 160 horsepower form. It really is a lovely handling car through corners. In fact, to the point of being better through corners than a number of actual hot hatches that I've driven. It felt super purposeful. The front-wheel drive chassis is very forgiving. Front-wheel drive most of the time will pull you out of trouble, quite literally, with the front wheels, whereas rear-wheel drive you can be, a bit more leery. All-wheel drive tends to snap at a certain point without warning. Not so much with front-wheel drive, it's more of a gradual loss of control. So in terms of being forgiving, well, it definitely is. It's super fun. It feels like a very well set up driving position as well, almost like a little cup car, like a little touring car kind of vibe. And of course there were racing versions of these as well. I will say, as far as the interior goes, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There is some cheaper plastics, unsurprisingly for a Peugeot. The steering wheel is a little bit out of place. It's very big and very chunky, and surprisingly kind of blank looking. It looks like it was just taken from any other car. The rear seats are absolutely useless. That does have to be said. Jag XK style. You shouldn't think of this as a 2+2 because it really isn't. If you're going to buy one of these, if you've got kids, if you've got friends, forget it. Buy something else. This is a 2-seater, really. You should consider it that way. And you can use the rear seats for luggage, as well as, of course, the boot. That's the approach you should have. Anything above that is just a bonus. Aside from that, I would say that the RCZ is actually a really well-rounded attempt from Peugeot. Does this car do anything perfectly? Not necessarily. I would say that overall, the two things which it does best are style, especially from the back, and handling. Those two things are, if you think about it, among the most important things for a sports car to do right. You want it to look nice and you want it to be fun. this does both of those things. The added bonus points come from just how affordable they are. I mean, we're literally talking a car that you can buy on such a ridiculously low budget, in a higher mileage case at least, that you can buy it for like quote-unquote normal car money. Like literally the kind of price you'd usually buy a Ford Fiesta for, you can buy one of these. That's pretty amazing, at least potentially. On the other hand, the fuel is fantastic as well, which means that even though the practicality takes a hit on space, it certainly makes up for it in terms of economy. Now, when the economy is in practice, the 55-litre tank, which is 12 UK gallons, works out to, even with that average 40 to the gallon, overall economy that these get, you're talking 480 miles to a tank of fuel. That's very impressive. That's around £60-70 worth of fuel, depending on fuel prices here in the UK. So again, it's definitely a car you could use every day. In fact, I would say, as far as these semi-sports cars, if not sports coupes go, it's a really strong choice of one if you do intend to use it as a daily. By far the biggest thing that you do need to research for yourself, look into, carefully consider and weigh up, and certainly read the owner's reviews of and experiences of people in whatever kind of price range, model, variant, and especially mileage category you're going to be looking at, is the reliability. Because if you get a good one, it could be fantastic and you could end up having it as one of the best cars you've ever owned, and I could see people buying something like an R model or a 200 horsepower, maybe even the diesel, and absolutely loving it. There's so much to love. On the other hand, I could see someone getting one that's dirt cheap, has higher miles, taking the risk, buying a car that's maybe just about to need a ton of work and that's why it's being sold, and absolutely hating it. It could easily fall either way, so be sure that as much as you can, be informed especially by actual owners as well as just what I or any other journalist are saying about how it feels on the surface, and then really calculate if it's worth the risk to you, and as much as you can, get a car look into its history. Any kind of servicing on a car like this is a good sign, because when a car is cheaper, it tends to change hands more. People just sell it when it gets issues. So look for that kind of telltale stuff in its history. Look for servicing, look for receipts, look for repairs, because something that has been repaired is better condition than it would be for its equivalent brand new part mileage. This is the kind of stuff that you should weigh up. Again, you could say that about basically buying any car, but there are definitely some which you need to consider that more with than others, and I would say that this is one of those. Ultimately, the RCZ, I believe, offers a huge amount of car to love, but in a very hot hatch kind of way. It's a hot hatch in its soul, and in its charisma, and in its fun, but it's a sports car in its visuals, and its layout, and its sometimes impracticality of space. If that's the kind of blend that you're looking for, I would actually say it's a very interesting alternative at the very least to the Audi TT, if not necessarily as safe of an option. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts, and hopefully I will eventually review the RCZR on the channel. I certainly want to, and based on how much I love this one, I could definitely see myself adoring that car, but we'll see when the time comes. And of course, if you want to check out other reviews which I've done, you can click the playlist here on screen, and until next time I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.